All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Now, over the last 2 years, we've seen the Democratic Party take a strong shift towards democratic socialism. We, of course, saw last year, we covered it here on the show, Zohran Mamdani, a self-described democratic socialist, win his NYC mayoral race against Andrew Cuomo in a major shock to the Democratic establishment. We just saw last week, I believe he's not actually a democratic socialist, but he's a far-left progressive endorsed by a bunch of democratic socialists like Bernie Sanders, win in his Michigan Senate race, Abdul El-Sayed. And we've seen across the country in local races, congressional races, we've seen DSA members, Democratic Socialists of America, win their races all across the country in Democratic primaries. And this is startling, and this has the standard bearers of capitalism all in a frenzy. And by standard bearers of capitalism, I mean the faux capitalists, Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin. And I'll explain in today's episode why they are faux capitalists, why they're not actually the true standard bearers of this long lineage of economic thought of capitalism, free markets, voluntary exchange of goods and services, and private property rights. On all of these counts, they are total hypocrites, and I'll explain this in this episode. And I'll also talk to you about why it is such a bad thing for capitalism and for forwarding these ideas of economic liberty. Because if this is the best that the capitalist side of the debate in this country has to offer, it's these war-hungry, neocon, in many ways, socialists, Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro, a couple we'll discuss today, then that's not good for what is the future of this economic debate in this country. Capitalists, free market people need to up their game in this debate and in this discourse to actually be philosophically consistent on these issues. So that's what we'll be discussing today on the Quest for Clarity podcast.
We must take back our cities and take back our culture and take back our country.
Ideas spread, they can't stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government.
There is a yearning in this country for somebody who will vote for principles over party.
The people of this country want what they want, and they're not getting it. None of the wars we've went to over the past 20 years have been essential or necessary at all. They've all been wars of choice. They convince you that you are the government. They convince you that their war efforts are your war efforts. And our politicians are more focused on wars abroad than the money at home. That's the truth. The government is the problem. All right, everybody, before we begin, if you could please go down below this video here on YouTube and hit like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. It helps the channel grow. And if you also wouldn't mind going to my Instagram, X, Spotify, and Substack and giving all those a follow, I'd really appreciate that as well. But let's get into this topic here. What really got me interested in talking about this today was a tweet actually from Mark Levin. Now, just for some background here, we'll read the tweet in a second. The Mark Levin side of this discussion, the Ben Shapiro side of this, the neocons who claim to be the standard bearers for capitalism, they have set the stage already for 2028, going into this next presidential election cycle, as a debate between the capitalists, true conservatives, the people who believe in free markets, which Mark Levin labels himself, as well as the other people who agree with him on this, against the nationalist populists like Tucker Carlson or J.D. Vance or people like this, or I guess Marjorie Taylor Greene or Steve Bannon or Thomas Massie, any of these other people, and this is all a misunderstanding of what these people believe. But that's what the debate is being set up to be in 2028 by Mark Levin here. And we'll just read his tweet in his own words, what he is describing this conflict within the right wing in America as being. It says, quote, "I look forward to, indeed am excited about, the debate between we, the constitutional conservatives / capitalists, and the nationalist populists, or whatever nomenclature they settle on, in the lead up to the 2028 presidential primaries, including domestic and foreign policy, the role of government, and market capitalism. It's a debate we must be and will be having." Now, there's a lot of things left unsaid in that tweet, obviously, but what's implied through his tweet there is that he and the people on his side of this debate are the people who believe in free markets, limited government, and a interventionist foreign policy. He might not say it like that, but it may be a strong national security is what he'd say it as. But really, it's a interventionist foreign policy, engaging in regime change, as we'll get into in a bit, arming the Iranian people to overthrow their government. This very neocon, hawkish foreign policy that Mark Levin believes in. And the contradiction's already apparent when you think about limited government yet world empire. That's two things cannot really coexist. But nonetheless, that's the debate that he claims, that's the side he claims to be on in this debate, is him and Ben Shapiro and these people, who we'll also discuss. They believe they are the people who believe in free market capitalism, and therefore, since they believe that they believe this, they don't really believe it, but since they think that they do, they label themselves openly and proudly as the capitalists. They're the free market, free enterprise, voluntary exchange of private property. They say that they are this side of the debate, comparing themselves to the democratic socialists, and they are the ones who are standing up for real capitalist values, the values of free enterprise. This is what they believe, and it's totally, totally false. And we'll get into this here in a bit. But what does Mark Levin himself, in an appearance on his TV show, Life, Liberty, and Levin, describe capitalism as? This is the system he says he believes in. Let's hear him in his own words describing what capitalism is. Take a look.
Capitalism is not based on some 34-year-old's ideology or anybody's ideology or philosophy. It's a voluntary, spontaneous system of human interaction. Nobody invented it. It's not an ideology. It's been going on since the beginning of mankind. That's the truth. You have billions and billions of decisions being made by individuals or companies or unions or whatever every single day, not just in the United States, but all over the world. So a relative handful of ideologues, like Sanders, who's never had a private job, AOC, who couldn't even pour her drinks right, Mondami, they're going to replace all of this with something that we know will fail? Where do they get their information from? What about human motivation? What about human desires? What about human interests? What about entrepreneurs? We're the ones that make the country work, not government. Government? They don't make anything work. So the answer is more government? I don't think so.
So Mark Levin believes that what defines capitalism, the core pillars of what capitalism is, which is, again, the system that he says he believes in, is voluntary, spontaneous system of human interaction. That's how he describes this system, a voluntary, spontaneous system of human interaction. Now, right off the bat, that sounds almost Misesian or Rothbardian in his description of the system, which is the type that I subscribe to. Now, what makes this so... Once we actually define these terms, what is capitalism, what is socialism, you see how much of a hypocrite that Mark Levin is, because we all know him as the figure that is always pushing for more offensive wars, wars of choice, wars of aggression against the enemies of largely Israel, Iran. He's advocated for bombing Hezbollah in Lebanon. He's advocated that we fund and arm Israel's genocide in Gaza. And he's advocated as well that we up our efforts in Ukraine and fighting against Putin and Russia and getting ready to fight Xi Jinping if he chooses to invade Taiwan and China. So this is the posture, foreign policy-wise, that Mark Levin subscribes to, as he simultaneously claims to be someone who's for voluntary exchange of private property. He says that private property, has said this multiple times, that private property is a core pillar of not only America, but Western civilization. It's, in fact, it's one of, if not the most important aspects of capitalism and of Western civilization, what makes us different from the barbarians and the savages. This is how Mark Levin frames the importance of these pillars of capitalism that he subscribes to. Again, he claims to subscribe to this ideology. Now, if we actually define what these things are, and to define them, I'm going to go with the terms laid out that I think are completely accurate in Keith Knight's book, Domestic Imperialism, 9 Reasons I Left Progressivism. And for those who don't know, check out Keith Knight's work at the Libertarian Institute and the Don't Tread on Anyone podcast. He's a great resource for libertarianism, and he has this book where he goes 9 reasons why he left progressivism, and he just debunks fallacy after fallacy that progressives believe in. And what you notice throughout it is that not only do progressives believe in these fallacies, but many conservatives also believe these fallacies about government and the nature of the state. But just for today, we're going to focus on the terms, the definition part of this book, which I think are very accurate and very concise, these definitions of capitalism and socialism. First, we'll go socialism. Keith Knight defines it as the institutionalized interference with or aggression against private property and private property claims. And this, at the end of the day, is always what socialism boils down to. It's saying that someone else has the overarching right to come in and whenever they feel like it, to whatever extent prudence will allow, and take your private property, your money. They can seize your assets. They can do whatever they want, so long as it's under this guise of serving the common good, and so long as there's been a democratic process that has made it justified in their view to take your stuff. So this is what socialism at the end of the day boils down to. It is the institutionalized aggression, the right of this entity called the state to come in and take your private property whenever they feel like it. They have the overarching right to your property. That's what socialism is. Capitalism, on the contrary, is a social system based on the explicit recognition of private property and non-aggressive contractual exchanges between private property owners. So socialism is the institutionalized aggression against private property, whereas capitalism is the recognition of private property rights that individuals have and the non-aggressive exchange of this property through contracts. Non-aggressive, voluntary, whereas socialism is by force, through aggression, through the mechanism of the state. That is the key difference between these two systems, socialism and capitalism. And socialism can exist on a policy-by-policy level. That's what many people don't understand. They think that in order to be a socialist society, there must be this massive workers' revolution that has taken over, and the entire system that we operate under must be socialist at its very core. That's not the case. In many ways, right now, we live in a substantially more socialist society than many of the capitalists like Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin, or the supposed capitalists, would claim that we do. So anytime the government exercises this authority they have a monopoly on force in this geographical area. Whenever they exercise that to seize your private property unjustly through force, they are acting in a socialist manner, because that is what, again, at the end of the day, socialism boils down to. It is the institutionalized aggression against private property and private property claims. Again, if the definition of socialism is the institutionalized aggression on private property, then that can't just apply when Mark Levin feels like applying it. He can't use that principled stance of being against that, being for private property and against the aggression on private property. He can't use that principle to rant against Zohran Mamdani using taxpayer-forced funds to operate a government-run grocery store in New York City on the one hand, and then be totally okay, and not only okay, but be an enthusiastic cheerleader for the federal government taking everyone's money by force and using it to fund the Pentagon, for example. Using it to fund war, which not only is a massive government program, one of, if not the biggest government programs, but it's also the most deadly in terms of the direct amount of death that it causes. The wars, the endless wars that are funded by force, by aggression, by the government, through the government taking money from the taxpayers by force and using that money to fund these projects, those wars have resulted in the deaths of millions of people in just the last 20 years. Yet, Mark Levin doesn't have any problem with the state enacting this authority to just take people's private property at will, straight out of their wallet, straight from what they earn. The state has the overarching authority to just have a portion of what you earn from your labor. The state just gets that, just totally involuntarily through their monopoly on force over this geographical area. And then they get to use that money that they've stolen from you to go fund these massive projects that include, number one, like Levin is ranting about, government-run grocery stores by Zohran Mamdani, free buses by Zohran Mamdani, fund all those projects, which he has a deep, deep problem with on a foundational principle level, we're told. Yet, he totally is in favor of this exact same system, the forceful seizure of private property, if it's going to fund the state's wars, the mass murder campaigns, which has resulted in the death of millions. Is that not the least bit hypocritical from Mark Levin? Is that not totally, backwards? If anything, it's obviously unprincipled. His principles are not consistently applied. And now we're no longer in the realm of principles, we're in the realm of preferences, which is a lot less philosophically grounded and firm. Mark Levin, instead of being a principled supporter of private property and voluntary exchange of private property overall, on economic and moral grounds, he selectively picks and chooses where he wants to apply this logic, which on its face is sound logic, but he chooses where to apply it. He applies it to government-run programs on the local level. He'll apply it if you get him going in a rant to Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. He has no problem with applying it to those, yet when it comes to the mass murder campaigns he supports in foreign countries, he totally loses all of his senses, all of his economic supposed principles, because he needs to be full-fledged in support of these campaigns abroad, these wars abroad, many of them on behalf of foreign countries. Speaking of welfare, Mark Levin, who regularly goes on rants against welfare, is totally supportive of the foreign aid complex which is just welfare, stealing from poor people in the United States to give it to rich oligarchs abroad. He's totally in favor of that, especially when it's to Israel. He's totally in favor of propping up Israel, which he says desperately needs our help to fend off their enemies. He's totally in favor of taking private property and infringing on the system of voluntary exchange, intervening in that system, using the weapon of the state to intervene in the system of voluntary economic exchange and interfere with the right of people to have private property, to take their money, send it abroad, and have Israel use it to kill babies in Gaza. He's not only okay with that, but he's totally enthusiastic about it and has nothing in the back of his mind ringing off saying, wait a minute, is this not an infringement on the supposed principles that I claim to have about private property and free markets and capitalism and voluntary exchange of said private property? Because it's the biggest, most glaring example of this. Yet this never comes to him in his hours and hours and hours of talking about these issues. The blatant contradiction and his lacking of any principled defense of private property. It's obvious. Here's a clip from a similarly hypocritical person, Ben Shapiro, claiming to be standing up for capitalism. Well, this is a big problem. This is the problem that capitalism in the public discourse has right now, is that people like Ben Shapiro are the representatives of it. They've crowned themselves king capitalist. Yet when people complain about price inflation from the Fed printing trillions of dollars in the last 20 years, when people complain about the inflation that results from that, instead of blaming the Federal Reserve, he blames instead the 20-year-olds who can't afford to go to Chipotle and says that you're lazy, you need to work more. That's where he directs his ire. It's at the teenagers and at the 20-something-year-olds, the young people that can't afford to live in this economy, instead of focusing it on the government, which he supposedly blames for all the economic woes. He turns it back on the young people who complain about the inflation caused by their policies, instead of focusing it at the Federal Reserve and the inflation industrial complex that we've seen in this country for decades. So Ben Shapiro's priorities of who he's lecturing is all off. He should be focusing his ire, if he's so serious in his principles, at the federal government, at the Federal Reserve, and at Congress for the ridiculous amount of spending that they've had for decades on end. Yet instead of doing that, he totally sides with the Republicans on the big, beautiful monstrosity bill, the trillions of dollars in that. And he then turns around and lectures the people that are upset that they can't afford a burrito at some fast food restaurant, and doesn't think at all that this could have something to do with the economic policies that he supports. And then he gets all confused why the democratic socialists are rising and why the supposed capitalists are falling. It's because he has falsely represented capitalism. He is not a capitalist. Let me be very clear. Ben Shapiro is not a free market capitalist in any consistent or real sense. He, like Mark Levin, will pick and choose which government policies he wants to steal your money and send to fund. Just like Mark Levin, he is totally in favor of this war in Iran. He's in favor of infringing on your private property rights to take your money and send it to go fund this war in Iran. That's resulted in death and destruction and economic chaos over the world. That's also led to prices rising. So the supposed capitalist, the supposed free market guy, and we'll get to the clip here, he's so deeply concerned with the rights of individuals to have private property, except for this massive, deadly exception of funding the manufacturing of weapons of war to drop on children in Gaza and drop on innocent homes like they did the other day in Iran. So take a look at Ben Shapiro and his standing up for capitalism and his debunking of socialism. Take a look.
In a free country, wealth and the capacity to gain it is largely contingent on the decisions that you make. It doesn't just fall upon you. Most wealth in the United States is not inherited. Most wealth in the United States is created over the course of lifetimes by people who engage in economic activity and commerce. Capitalism is good because capitalism is freedom. Socialism is bad because socialism is tyranny. Not it's an aspect of tyranny. Socialism itself is tyranny. The statement of socialism is that your labor is owed to the society. The notion of socialism is that you do not own your own freedom. You do not own your own time. You do not own your own labor. You do not own your own work. You do not own the products of your own work. The basic notion of capitalism is you own all of those things, and now you have to engage in free exchange with someone else who does not owe you anything. If you want to thrive, if you want to succeed, you are going to have to make something somebody else wants. People think capitalism is selfishness. No, socialism is selfishness. The notion that I have to somehow supply you the money so you can sit in your basement and paint with watercolors. Socialism, the idea that I'm supposed to fulfill all your dreams by paying you for something I don't want and have no need for.
Let's just start with the first part of what Shapiro said there. He's making the moral and rational case for capitalism there. He says that wealth does not just fall upon you. You don't just trip and fall and stumble on wealth. And you need, in order to get wealth, you need to do something or create something of value. You need to provide another person in a voluntary exchange with something of value that they wish to pay you for. That's how you build wealth, and that's just totally true. And that's according to Ben Shapiro. And this is the principle. This is, by the way, the title of this video from Ben Shapiro is Ben Shapiro Explains Socialism in 2 minutes. This is his 2 minutes that he's clipped out from this college lecture of explaining what makes socialism morally worse than capitalism. And the first things he chooses to say is that because wealth does not just fall upon you, it must be, in order to morally obtain it, it can't be through force, it must be through providing value. Now, I mean, I don't even think I need to go on here to let you guess what the massive contradiction in this is. So Ben Shapiro describes capitalism and its virtues as being stemmed from their prioritization of voluntarism and the voluntary exchange of goods and services and private property, based on the assumption that both parties in this exchange are getting something of value. You are paying for something that you value enough to pay for it. And and the other end, the producer end of this, is making something of value that they wish to exchange for money of equal value. That is the description of capitalism from Ben Shapiro. And what makes it immoral for socialism to be a thing, according to Shapiro, is that the socialist system is where you get wealth through force, not through providing value, but you get wealth through force. Ben Shapiro, like Mark Levin, totally endorses the way that the Pentagon gets funded, for example. The Pentagon, which has not passed an audit in 8 years, is about to possibly receive, they proposed a 50% budget increase for the Pentagon. There are massive inefficiencies, there's massive waste in the Pentagon. Now, what incentive, besides the goodwill of the people in the Pentagon, which I don't think any of us believe that there's this massive goodwill to clean up waste, fraud, and abuse in the Pentagon. There's a massive incentive, actually, to the contrary, because who knows where that money is going. There's a lot of inner working dealings with these defense contractors. Ben Shapiro does not apply his economic or moral principles to the Pentagon, one of the largest pieces on the federal budget that gets its money through force, through taxation. So morally, Ben Shapiro and his supposed belief in private property and the moral value of voluntary exchange suddenly does not apply that. He completely makes a cutout for this institution, the Pentagon, which he has deemed totally arbitrarily as important enough to have its funding be derived through force. Similarly, he is totally okay with money being sent through force to fund Ukraine. He's been a strong advocate for the American people to have their private property, their money stolen from them, and sent overseas to fund Ukraine in their fight against Russia. Now, where in that scenario, where in this policy prescription is private property valued by Ben Shapiro? It's totally thrown out the window. This supposed core, again, this is what makes it so hypocritical and so insane. These people, Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, they claim that their core pillars of their ideology and their belief in capitalism, their economic theories, their core beliefs is in the valuing of private property and the superiority of voluntary exchange rather than coercive exchange. Rather than having your stuff stolen from you, the voluntary exchange method is much better. This is what they say, and this is what they build the rest of their ideologies on, is these beliefs. And they say it themselves. They say that Western civilization is built on the belief in private property and voluntary exchange of said private property. Yet, when it comes to the most deadly government program of them all, which is war, and funding these proxy wars abroad in Israel and Gaza, in Russia and Ukraine, when it comes to this massive government program, which is very prone to waste, fraud, and abuse, which they claim to be against, which is prone to corruption. You're telling me there's no corruption in weapons manufacturing and in this international foreign policy regime that we have? In this system that is most prone to all the things they claim to hate about socialism, they They wholeheartedly support the forced seizure of your private property to fund these endeavors. And they don't even bat an eye. They don't even think for a second, wait, is this not totally contradicting my supposed economic worldview? It's unbelievable. They claim to care about the waste and fraud. How can you care about that when you have not a word to say about the 50% increase potentially in the Pentagon's budget? They say that we can't have government-run grocery stores, and this is correct. We cannot have government-run grocery stores because if this grocery store that is run by the government gets its revenue regardless of whether or not it provides a good service and sells good goods, whether or not they provide a good service to the community, in that being a grocery store, they get revenue regardless because their revenue is acquired by force through taxation, through the government. So they don't have as many ways of calculating different what their prices should be. They don't have the profit and loss incentive because they're getting funded regardless of if people even shop at this grocery store or if people even come into this grocery store. They get funded regardless. So there's no incentive inherently for them to improve their products or their service. There's just not these basic economic signals that private industry would have. How does that not apply equally to these massive federal programs which they support, the biggest one and most deadly one being war? How could they the Pentagon is not an efficient place, and that's because they get, not only do they get the same funding every year, the budget for the Pentagon goes up year after year despite the inefficiencies, despite the disastrous wars. They just lost a war in Iran and they're going to get a big budget increase. Despite their poor performance and their inefficiencies and their inadequate allocation of resources, despite all the negative economic statistics about the Pentagon, they're still going to get a budget increase. So what possible financial incentive do they have to improve their service of national security, providing security to the nation, if they're going to get paid by the citizenry regardless of how well they provide that service? So actually, it makes us less safe to have this system funded through coercion and through aggression, through force. Because if people decided to opt out of this system because they felt it was inadequate in providing security to the nation, then maybe they would be incentivized to improve their operations, improve their service. The Pentagon is making us actively less safe as a nation. It's degrading our national security because it's killing innocent people across the world and inspiring blowback terrorism. What do you think 9/11 was? It's making us less safe. This foreign policy has resulted in countless terrorist attacks on our soil because they're inspiring hatred against the American people. So they're not holding up their end of the bargain. The supposed storyline from people like Ben Shapiro and the rest of the socialists in all these other government programs that they support, whether it be universal health care, not Ben Shapiro, I'm talking about these other socialists, but they use the same reasoning, whether it be in universal health care or this universal national security or any of these government programs. They claim that in exchange for the forced funding of this, you will be provided with a service, whether it be healthcare or whether it be national security in this case. Well, in a voluntary exchange of goods and services, if I wasn't receiving my end of the bargain, I could choose to pull my funding and go somewhere else that I felt would better provide me with the service of equal value to my funding. But with the Pentagon, no matter how many times there's terrorist attacks on our soil, no matter how many times they go and conduct wars that I don't support, and no matter how much money they waste in inefficiencies in their own operations, I am still forced to fund them. I cannot withdraw my funding. If I tried to, I would go to jail. So there's factually no economic incentive for them to improve their operations. If they don't pass an audit for 8 years in a row and then nothing happens, their budget actually increases, what is the incentive for them to improve or be more moral or more efficient economically or allocate resources better or respond to threats on the American homeland better? Nothing. They don't have an incentive at all. Yet all of this obvious inefficiency and these obvious faultiness with which this whole system is conducted on the national security front, with all of this being so apparent, Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin, who would point this out in a second and dedicate an entire hour-long podcast to pointing out this if it were happening in a government-run grocery store or a government-run clothes store, they have nothing to say. And they actually support increasing the budget for this incredibly inefficient socialist program that is the Pentagon. And these are the standard bearers for capitalism. The standard bearers for capitalism and voluntary exchange and private property rights are the same people supporting infringing on your private property to go fund this incredibly inefficient program. the biggest and deadliest government program. It's no wonder why the democratic socialists who are anti-war are rising in popularity with young people. They hear Ben Shapiro preaching about capitalism, and then the next segment preaching about the mass murder of kids in Gaza as if it's a good thing. And you're like, why are the democratic socialists who don't want to fund the Pentagon this much and don't want to send money to Israel, why are they rising? Oh, it's because Ben Shapiro falsely associates his neocon foreign policy with free market capitalism when they're nothing at all the same. They're totally opposite. It's incompatible. This neocon foreign policy, this massive military industrial complex that we have, where the government takes your money and then doles it out to their contractors, that system is incompatible with capitalism and free markets and free enterprise and voluntarism. It's not this. You cannot have those two things and call this a capitalist system. That is a massive piece of socialism in our country, and Shapiro supports it, and he makes it really one of the big pieces of his identity is supporting this robust national security, which really just means endless wars abroad, endless death and destruction abroad, that any sensible person is against, obviously. Killing innocent people abroad, obviously, most people are against that. That's why the public polling against the Iran war and the genocide in Gaza is the way it is. Yet when you have the hallmark capitalist, this capitalist, Mr. King capitalist Ben Shapiro, out there preaching on the one end about free markets, and then the next segment saying how the death of children in Gaza is justified, well, it's no wonder why you're making capitalism look bad. Obviously, it's so obvious. And that is where we will end it off. Actually, I had one more thing I want to talk about. We had one more thing here to just showcase how these people who care so much about trade-offs, because that's another big piece of capitalism and right-wing thought in general. A big piece of right-wing thought is the understanding that there's no solutions and there's only trade-offs. That is Thomas Sowell. There's no solutions, only trade-offs. Yet these people who would say that endlessly about economics here domestically, Shapiro, Levin, they totally lose all this philosophical grounding when they discuss foreign policy. Again, here is Mark Levin, just today, actually, saying, "Arm the Iranian people. Happy to see others finally declaring support for it. We must do it now. Arm the Iranian people." And I pointed this out on Twitter. Suddenly, the people who care deeply about trade-offs in domestic economics aren't taking this logic and expanding it to everything else. Mark Levin never once shares any specifics about who is going to be armed in Iran. Which civilians are we arming here? Every fighting age male is just going to be armed with an AK-47 in Iran to do what? What are the directions here? This is obviously unhinged. What weapons are we giving them? Are we giving them tanks, pistols? Like, what are we talking about arming the people? With what weapons? Who are we arming here? Where in Iran are we arming them? The major cities and the sub? Like, what are we talking about? And with whose money? That's the key question. Mark Levin won't get into any of the specifics about what weapons or who these people are that we're arming. Are they Kurds? Is there organized opposition in this country that we're arming, we're communicating with? Where in the country are they? With what weapons? He'll never get into any specifics about any of that, the detailed stuff, because that would make it so that he can't just give these like social justice warrior, arm the Iranian people slogans, these virtue signals to his fellow neocons. So he'll never get into any specifics about that. But what he does know is that the funding for this will be done through force, through aggression, through the seizure of you and I's private property, our money being stolen by the government and sent to fund the weapons shipments to the Iranian people. He has no idea what he's even asking for here. He has no idea where this money is being sent, who it's going to do what, to what end, to overthrow the regime and replace it with what. He has no idea about the externalities of this decision to just literally parachute in weapons to the Iranian people. He has no idea. Yet he will just carelessly advocate for the wasting of what would probably be billions and billions of taxpayers' stolen money to go fund this project because he has decided that to him, that would be a justified example of the state aggressing on your private property. So again, what I'll end off here with is the exact same thing I started with. We are not in the realm of principles with these people. They don't principally believe in private property and voluntary exchange as the superior system. They believe in, they have a system of preferences. They're engaged in preferences, and they would prefer that the government not intervene in domestic affairs, and they would prefer that it does intervene for foreign policy. They would love a big government so long as it's abroad. And of course, we all know, all of us who understand the ramifications of these wars on our domestic country, we know that big government abroad necessarily leads to big government at home. Where do you think all the police stations get all their high-tech military gear? It's from the federal government. Where do you think this massive surveillance state comes from? It's from the Patriot Act during the Iraq War era, because we're fighting terrorism. So this is obviously, it all comes back home in the end to become from big government abroad to big government at home. And they support all this. So let's just get rid of this illusion that big government abroad does not mean big government at home. Let's get rid of this illusion that these are the standard bearers of capitalism, because they are simply not. They are in no way capitalist. They will seize your private property in a second if they like the state's justification for doing so. There's no principle at all economically to these people. So that's where we'll end it off for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please, please, please share this video with a friend, because this is a very important episode. Because, and we'll just end off with this real quick. With the rise of the democratic socialists, the name of capitalism and free markets has been totally slandered, and it's these people doing it. It's Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin who label themselves capitalist. People also like Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham and all these people who label themselves capitalist while supporting mass murder. Obviously, they're like attaching themselves to all these hideous ideas and then saying that it's capitalist. It's all a root of capitalism, or capitalism as at the root of all of this. So obviously, that negatively reflects on capitalism. So if we are to push forward here and trying to forward a capitalist society, a society based on voluntary exchange and private property, then we need to push back against these people just as much as the democratic socialists, because they are similarly as socialist in terms of their foreign policy, and they are falsely labeling, they're basically a false caricature of capitalism, and they are making us all look bad by proxy. So we need to call it out when we see it. Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro are not capitalists in any real effective sense. They are socialists in a different way. So that's where we'll end it off for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to go down below this video and hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a good day.
We must take back our cities and take back our culture and take back our country.
Ideas spread, they can't stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government.